So, the aliens in Jujutsu Kaisen have a pretty insane backstory, and today we're explaining everything about their past, including small details you may have missed. To start things off, the aliens are from a planet called Simuria, which is home to a few different species. In chapter 10 of Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo, it was revealed that Simuria has oceans full of fish, as well as livestock that they use for food. Besides that, the planet has two other lifeforms that we know of, and those are the Kalyans and the Simurians. Because Simurians are the dominant species, we'll talk about them first, and for the most part, they look human. The main physical difference between us and them is that every Simurian has a third eye, which is where their curse energy comes from. In Simurian culture, the name for curse energy is Rolloluca, but as we'll explain later, not everyone is able to use it. Also, as a quick side note, human curse energy comes from the stomach area, so yeah, no need for a magical third eye. Now, on Simuria, there are different types of Simurians. For instance, members of the Deskunte tribe are born with horns on their head and a vertical third eye, while the Rumelian tribe have normal shaped eyes and a deep connection with curses. In this panel, we saw that from dozens of miles away, Rumelian warriors can still hear cursed spirits, whereas for Deskunte it's not so easy. Beyond this, the two tribes have big cultural differences, which in recent times has led to wars between them. These conflicts are why the Rumelians were forced to leave the planet, and to break down what happened, we first have to talk about Kalyans. Kalyans are a unique species that are similar to cursed spirits, but what makes them special is that they have a solid physical form. What this means is that unlike cursed spirits, which are invisible to 99.9% of people, Kalyans can be seen by everyone, and they don't just vanish when they die. Therefore, if we had to compare Kalyans to something on Earth, then they're actually most similar to the Curse Womb death paintings. For context, Choso and all his siblings are hybrids between a curse and a human, meaning they all have solid physical forms and they can't die from old age. It was confirmed in this panel that Kalyans are the same in that they can't die from old age or from other natural causes, so who knows, maybe if you go back far enough, Kalyans are some type of hybrid. Whatever the case may be, what we know for sure is that Kalyans and Rumelians have a connection that goes back to ancient times. Ever since then, Rumelians have believed that Kalyans were sent by the gods, and that cursed energy was given to them by these creatures. There's actually one specific Kalyan they've worshipped for 2,000 years, and in their village it has a pretty important job. Whenever a child is born, this creature can immediately tell if they have the power to use Jujutsu. If they are a sorcerer, then their job will be to protect the village in the future, and the child doesn't really have a choice. Maru described it as being a destiny that you're born with, which made him slightly jealous of the freedom that Earth sorcerers have. Another thing the village Kalyan does is that it gives middle names to every Rumelian. So for example, Maru's name is Marulu Val von Yelvori, and Dura's name was Dura Val Bobbidi Mechika. What this shows is that Kalyans and Simurians can technically live together peacefully, but not every tribe feels the same way. Historically, all the other tribes have wanted to exterminate Kalyans, and to be fair, they had a valid reason. Despite seeming like peaceful animals, these creatures will attack and eat anyone who's not Rumelian. As a result, the Deskunte tribe destroyed every Kalyan on their land, while on the flip side, the Rumelians refused to do the same. Their reason for protecting these creatures wasn't just about religion, but it was also about protecting themselves. For context, if a Kalyan is murdered, then Rumelians will start shedding tears from their third eye. We mentioned earlier that this eye is the source of their Rolloluca, so shedding tears from it puts a ton of stress on the brain. From what we've heard, it's even possible for them to die from this stress, so yeah, you can see why killing Kalyans was never an option. Of course, the Deskunte didn't care about this, and as the strongest tribe, they decided to invade Rumel. Not only was their entire village crushed, but the Deskunte also stole a ton of natural resources. On Simuria, there's a special type of rock called mul that's able to convert curse energy into other forms of energy. Back on Earth, something like this would probably be used to turn curse energy into electricity, although on Simuria it's unclear how exactly they use it. From what we've seen, their society isn't that advanced, and their tech is at least a couple hundred years behind humans. Despite that, mul was described as being a very valuable resource, and in Rumel, there was an entire quarry full of it. This quarry is what the Deskunte actually wanted, and the situation with the Kalyans, it was just an excuse to take over. Following this, the Rumelians were banished from their own land, and forced to move to a desert where nothing grows. This rocky environment was the Kalyans' natural habitat, but it came with a ton of problems. To start with, it had virtually no clean water, and Rumelian kids were getting sick all the time. On top of that, this barren land was isolated from the other tribes, and so for the next 10 years, the Rumelians were on their own. During that time, they had no choice but to live in these tents, and they couldn't make money since Deskunte didn't allow them to trade. All that being said, there was one person who had a vision to turn things around, and that person was Dura. Dura was widely known as being the strongest Rumelian, since his physical stats went far above anyone else in his tribe. In fact, at some point before their village was destroyed, Dura won a fighting tournament that was hosted by the Deskunte. There are two important things that made this win so impressive. The first is that the Deskunte warchief took part in this tournament, and we know for a fact that he's strong because in Deskunte culture, the strongest sorcerers are the ones who have the authority. The second reason this was impressive is that all of the matches were rigged to favor the Deskunte side, but despite that, Dura still won anyway. Now, after their village was destroyed, most of the Rumelians hated the Deskunte, and to be fair, they're not wrong for thinking that way, but Dura had a much more nuanced approach. His ultimate dream was for both sides to peacefully coexist, and he knew it was possible since his best friend growing up was from Deskunte. What brought them together is they shared the same goal of becoming warriors, and so Dura wanted to give all of Rumel and all of Deskunte something to unite them again. The idea he came up with was to build a canal that would connect Deskunte to a place called Shama. At the time, if the Deskunte wanted to get to Shama, then they first had to sail the long way around Rumel. Dura's plan was to build a canal over here, allowing the Deskunte to sail through Rumel instead of going around it. Long term, this project would have benefits for both sides, and it's something the Deskunte had tried to do many years ago. The problem was that their workers kept getting attacked by Kalyans, and so construction had to stop. However, Dura himself had no problem with Kalyans, and so after the war, he stepped in to personally dig the rest of the canal. As you can imagine, his tribe didn't want this, and some people even thought that he was being bribed by the Deskunte. Along the way, certain people even sabotaged his project, and the only help he received was from two kids. These kids were a pair of twins named Maru and Cross, whose strength was implied to be on their same level as grown men. During the war, both their parents were killed by the Deskunte, and since then these orphans had been getting into trouble. From what it sounds like, they were stealing from other people in the camp, and the punishment for this is to have one of your arms cut off. On Earth, this type of punishment has happened in a ton of different cultures, showing once again that humans and Simurians are very similar. Anyhow, to save the kids from losing their arms, Dura basically adopted them and then forced them to help with the canal. Because the twins admired his strength, they listened to what he said, although Cross didn't really want to help the Deskunte. After all, the Deskunte destroyed his home and killed his parents, so he saw no reason to do something that benefits them. However, Dura explained the canal benefits the Rumelians, since when it's done, he had plans to connect the canal to the Rumel River. If connected, this would give the tents a steady supply of clean water, and it would also make the desert more fertile. Gradually, Cross and everyone else, they began to see the value in what Dura was doing, and eventually, he got support from the Council of Elders. This council was led by Jabaloma, who's an alien that looks like Tengen, and from this moment, the entire village began helping. In this panel, you can see just how hard the project was, because they had to cut through miles and miles of rocks to reach the water over here. The job was so tough that it took them years to complete it, and by the time it was done, Maru and Cross were around 17. When the canal was finished, the Deskunte then began sailing through, and relations between the two sides did start improving. One example is how the Deskunte requested to build a port that would allow their ships to take a break during their long journey to Shama. The Deskunte themselves offered to cover all of the costs, while the Rumelians could make money by trading with the sailors. For the previous 10 years, Rumel had been in a bad financial situation, so this deal was a huge step towards improving their lives. One person who supported this deal was Jabaloma, even though his daughter was killed by Deskunte. Despite his personal pain, he still wanted to resume trade, since he valued the needs of the tribe above his own personal feelings. However, just when it seemed like everything was turning around, a tragedy happened that changed everything. In particular, the Deskunte chief's daughter was murdered by a Kalyan. I mentioned before that on Deskunte land, Kalyans had been wiped out, and so the chief blamed Rumelians for his daughter's death. Of course, the reality was they had nothing to do with it, but sadly the truth wasn't important. What was important is that in exchange for his dead daughter, the chief wanted 90% of the Rumelians' land, including the canal that they had just built. The only way for Rumel to stop this was to win in a one-on-one duel, since this is how things are resolved in Deskunte culture. As you'd expect, the way it works is that each side chooses a fighter, and the Rumelians were quite confident that Dura could win. Crucially, Dura himself did not feel the same way, because he knew from experience that there were people stronger than him. Then, on the day of the fight, he came face to face with his childhood best friend, who was a warrior named Dubora Karaba. Dubora was born with a sacred power that was passed down through the Deskunte clan, and on Earth there is nothing like it. The story tries to describe this power as being murderous intent that's been given a solid physical mass. Dubora's technique then combines this murderous mass with light, which gives him a ton of different ways to use it. To make things better, he also has an overwhelming amount of Rolloluca, to the point that multiple different characters have been scared to move in his presence. Now, despite being the Sukuna of the Simurians, he's actually a pretty chill person, and he had no desire to hurt Dura in any way. The problem for Dubora is that his younger sister was taken as a hostage, and the chief put a curse on her. Jabaloma described it as being a death curse, meaning Dubora's sister will die if he disobeys the chief or if the chief himself dies. This is the only reason he agreed to this duel, and to be fair, Dura completely understood. In this scene, it was clear that Dura knew he was going to die, and so before the fight he did two important things. Firstly, he requested that after he dies, Dubora protects the Rumelians, and surprisingly, Dubora did agree. Next, he gave his speech to all the people in the crowd, in which he exposed the Deskunte chief's true motivations. For context, in this crowd there were people from lots of different tribes who didn't know the real truth about what happened 10 years earlier. Most people believed that the war between the Deskunte and the Rumelians, they thought that it was a religious war over the Kalyans, but as we know, Mul was the real reason. By exposing the Deskunte, he hoped to get people on their side, since the Rumelians did need help if they were going to protect their land. After the speech, Dubora then killed his best friend, and what's crazy is he didn't even go all out. All he did was zap Dura's body so that his face would stay intact. Now, with the death of their strongest fighter, the Rumelians were screwed, because the Deskunte were planning to invade the next day. Realistically, their odds of survival were basically 0%, since they'd die if they tried to fight back, and they'd also die if they moved to the area where the Deskunte were telling them to go. Luckily, that night, Dubora showed up and revealed that Dura had left them all a gift. During his construction of the canal, Dura found a ton of mul that was even purer than the normal stuff. Over the years, he'd been storing it without anyone else knowing, and the amount was so huge, it could have been used to rebuild their village. Dura had kept it a secret to stop the Deskunte from knowing, and finding all of these rocks gave Maru an idea. One thing to say about Maru and Cross is they have a powerful curse technique named Chaos and Harmony. The chaos part can interfere with gravity, temperature, air pressure, trajectories, while also being able to send people into a state of confusion. At the same time, the harmony part works to bring people together, as it can translate any language and locate any person. The location ability works by choosing a target that's close to Maru or Cross, and then finding someone who's an equal match to that person. In this case, humanity was an equal match to the Simurians, and so when Harmony combined with the Mul, it led to the creation of this advanced spaceship. The name of this ship was Nornax, and somehow, using cursed energy, it had the potential to travel faster than light speed. In normal circumstances, obviously the Simurians could never build something like this. I mean, even humans couldn't build anything close to this. So the twins curse technique was genuinely the ultimate cheat code. Now, before they left the planet, Dubora offered to join them because he wanted to keep the promise that he'd made to his best friend. By leaving Simuria, it would also protect his sister, because by going trillions and billions of miles away, clearly, even if he betrays the chief, it's not going to activate the curse because he's too far away to affect his sister. Anyhow, after they left the planet, they spent almost 2 years zooming through space as 50,000 Simurians made their journey to Earth. I should point out that this isn't a ship of 50,000 sorcerers, since most Rumelians can't use cursed energy. In particular, Rumelian women simply don't have the potential to use Rolloluca, while the men have a chance, but even then it's still not guaranteed. That's why when you do get sorcerers, aka warriors, then it's their responsibility to protect the rest of the tribe. When Maru and Cross were children, their dad was a warrior as well, although for some reason he had an obsession with Mul. Instead of protecting his children, he died protecting this Mul, but on closer inspection, Maru realized that the Mul was actually just a normal rock. In that sense, their dad gave his life for nothing, and from Maru's point of view, his dad had failed as a warrior. This is definitely why Maru takes being a warrior so seriously, and it's why he went above and beyond to make sure their people could survive. For the 2 years they were in space, there was a lot of fear that they might not find somewhere, and there were also political changes. For example, the twins chose Dubora to be the new leader of the tribe, even though he's not one of them. Their reasoning was that number one, he's the strongest, and number two, because he's an outsider, he can make rational decisions that aren't based on emotions. This is super important because after being banished from their home, the Rumelians felt angry and, a lot of them wanted to lash back out at the world. In particular, one warrior called Osuki didn't want to get stolen from again, and so his solution to stop this was to become conquerors like the Deskunte. Rather than trying to coexist with someone, what he really wanted was to dominate. Whereas, Deborah's pretty chill, he's not experienced what they've experienced, and so he was in favor of taking a more peaceful approach. Eventually, in the year 2086, the Nornax arrived on Earth, and thanks to Harmony, they could speak any human language. At first, they spoke to America, who at the time were the strongest country, but surprisingly, America told the aliens to speak with Japan. Japan was the biggest country that had powers like the Simurians, and Maru was sent on a mission to see what these people were like. The aim of the mission was to see if coexistence was possible, and as of making this video, the answer is still unclear. On screen right now is my video explaining chapter 1 of JJK Modulo, where you can see how the humans reacted to the Nornax arriving. As always, thank you for watching, and until the next one, peace out.